Mama, if you eat that, you'll die.
That's what my 9-year-old son, Michael, whispered to me as I stood in front of the cake my husband had bought for my birthday. Michael, always wise beyond his years, seemed to know something. As soon as my husband, John, stepped into the kitchen, Michael quietly switched our plates. 10 minutes later, John suddenly began to struggle, foaming at his mouth, and fell down. In a panic, I called an ambulance, and he was rushed to the hospital. Later, I would learn about the horrifying fact that had unfolded behind the scenes, shaking me with fear. I am Linda, 43 years old, a full-time employee in the food industry, living with my 45 years old husband and 9 years old son, Michael. I met John 10 years ago, got married, and the following year, we were blessed with Michael. From a young age, Michael was a mature and intelligent child, able to read simple words and even some complicated ones by age 3, and he loved reading instruction manuals. Now at the age of 9, he would thoroughly research any word or subject that puzzled him or caught his interest, and often making sharp observations that impressed me. On the other hand, John, while gentle and calm when we were dating, turned out to be quite domineering after marriage. He believed housework was a woman's job, saying that a wife should always walk 3 steps behind her husband, and he did not do any houseworks. He would constantly nitpick everything I did. This became apparent when I started working part-time after enrolling Michael in daycare.
Hey, the house is getting dirty. Are you slacking off on cleaning?
But it's tough since we're both working. Could you help out a little?
Housework is the wife's job. It's ridiculous for you to ask me for help. If you can handle it, I'll ask my mom to help.
He said, and without consulting me, he gave my mother-in-law, Susan, a key to our house. Susan, who lived nearby with my father-in-law, Bob, had always been eager to interfere in our life, which bothered me.
The housework isn't done at all, poor John.
She started coming into our house unless she was not invited, and always said something sarcastic. I shouldn't have asked my husband to share the houseworks. To make matters worse, my husband was delighted that Susan came to our house and joined her in criticizing me. I can manage the housework myself, so there's no need for you to come over. I declared, refusing her help, and ended up handling all the houseworks by myself. However, when she stopped coming, my husband began spending more time at his parents' house. Especially after Bob passed away, he visited there more often. When I was sick, I asked him at his parents' house to make dinner at least for Michael. He scolded me, saying his mother never made his father do anything when she was ill, and decided to stay at his parents' house for a week to avoid catching my cold. I endured his attitude, and Michael started elementary school. I had a bit more time, so I decided to switch to a full-time job. I felt insecure about my marriage and wanted to be financially independent in case of any uncertainties.
It's fine if you become a full-time employee, but don't slack off on housework.
John said predictably, offering no help at all. It seemed like he had complained to Susan again.
John is complaining that the housework isn't getting done, so I've decided to come over and help.
Thus, she started coming over again, repeated sarcastic comments every time she saw me. I was exhausted from this repetitive cycle. Seeing this, Michael started to talk to Susan whenever she began her nagging.
Grandma, do you know the 4 major elements of happiness?
What?
Then, What about the happiness hormones?
What are you talking about?
Oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, endorphins. They are secreted from the pituitary gland in the brain. Let me explain in detail.
He would say. She couldn't interrupt him because he was her beloved grandson. Michael, displaying knowledge in science, history, math, and economics from sources I don't know, always exhausted Susan by the time she left. It was a day after Michael turned 9. John brought a cake for my birthday. Until then, John always bought expensive brand bags and clothes for Susan on her birthdays, but had never bought anything for me since our marriage. So I was surprised by this cake. He was extremely in a good mood, saying a soulless speech. Thank you for everything. I love you.
I chose your favorite tart for the birthday cake.
He said cheerfully while serving it. Michael, let's eat cake. After John came home, Michael quickly went to his room. When I knocked and opened the door, he was researching something on the old computer I had given him.
I'll be right there. Wait for me.
Then, as soon as he sat down, he whispered to me,
Mama, if you eat that, you'll die.
What? What do you mean?
I'll explain later. Just trust me for now.
He said firmly, looking into my eyes. I didn't understand, but it was the first time he was so insistent on his words.
Hey, what's wrong? Are you going to eat?
John urged me as I hesitated to touch the cake. I'd like to eat this cake with some coffee you make.
Okay. I'll make some now.
Surprisingly, John, who usually never listened to my requests, quickly went to the kitchen. Michael took this opportunity to switch John's plate and mine. When John came back with the coffee, he ate his piece of cake without any suspicion and kept urging us to eat. I cautiously took a bite of my cake. Watching us eat, John grinned and boasted, I went all the way to a famous bakery to get this. However, about 10 minutes later, he suddenly started foaming at his mouth and fell down.
Mama, call an ambulance.
I was in panic, unable to understand what was happening, but Michael calmly made John spit out what was in his mouth. Trembling, I called for an ambulance. In an ambulance, John, in a clouded state of consciousness, kept muttering, I put strong powder in the cake. He survived, but had to stay in the hospital for a few days for tests. Even after I returned home, his words about strong powder echoed in my ears.
Mama, I looked up strong powder on the internet earlier. It's dangerous to eat.
How did you know about it?
The seal on the cake box Dad brought was half peeled off.
Michael had become suspicious of John's behavior and so him secretly throwing something in the trash. When John went to change clothes, Michael checked the trash and found a bag labeled strong powder.
That's why I looked it up online.
I vividly remembered Michael's whispered warning right before we ate the cake. But the doctors didn't mention anything about poison.
Yay, because I almost made him spit it all out. Strong powder doesn't become dangerous unless it exceeds a certain amount. Probably nothing will show up in the tests.
I realized that if Michael hadn't acted quickly, I would have eaten that cake. The thought sent chills down my spine. Could John really have tried to kill me by putting something in the cake? We need to go to the police right away.
I think we shouldn't.
Why not?
Because Dad's the one who collapsed. If we tell the police now, they might think you did it.
His words plunged me into darkness. His reasoning made sense, and I felt utterly hopeless.
Don't worry, Mama. I'll take care of it.
Then, Michael went into John's study, a place he was usually forbidden to enter, and started looking for something.
Surely Dad must have left something behind.
Knowing his father's meticulous nature and habit of always making notes in his planner. Soon enough, Michael showed me a planner he had found. Inside, it detailed the components and effects of strong powder. This can't be true. As we read on, a horrifying truth emerged. John had already used this method to harm someone before, and that person was Bob. The planner meticulously described how he gradually increased the dosage given to Bob daily, with a note on the day of his passing that read, 10 grams leads to death. Shockingly, Susan had been helping him. They were in on it together. Flipping through the pages, we found a plan for my birthday.
Are you okay, Mama?
Michael asked as I realized I was shaking with fear and anger. I can't forgive them for trying to take my life after Bob. This planner could be an evidence, right?
Unfortunately, it might not be. They could claim it's just a fantasy written down. Besides, Grandpa has already been cremated, so there's no way to investigate.
I see. Without evidence, there was no way to bring them to justice. As I looked down, feeling hopeless, Michael gripped my hand tightly.
I'll find the evidence and protect you, Mama. Let's catch them together.
His words gave me strength, and I nodded firmly, gripping his hand. I resolved to stand against them. If they are determined to harm us, I will face them. For Michael and myself, I will protect our lives. I will also avenge Bob. Thus, Michael and I began preparing for the decisive battle, vowing revenge against John and Susan. Following Michael's advice that Grandma probably hasn't given up yet, I started keeping an eye on her. While she visited John in the hospital every day, one day she headed to a busy downtown area, several stations away from the nearest station to her house. I followed her to a shady-looking shop off the main street, where she eventually emerged with something in hand. Susan, what are you doing here? I approached her on the main street, pretending to bump into her by chance. Startled, she turned around.
Linda, what are you doing here, not visiting John and enjoying shopping instead?
Just some work stuff. But Michael is anxious about his dad's hospitalization and needs cheering up. Could you come to our house for a bit? She was so sarcastic as usual, but I invited her home. Which is something I normally wouldn't want to do, but today was necessary. As soon as we got home, Michael greeted her joyfully.
Grandma, I have something to show you. Come to my room.
He winked at me and pulled her forcefully into his room. In the meantime, I checked the contents of the bag she had brought from the shop. It contained a white powder, and I discreetly took a small amount and placed it in another bag. I took this somewhere on the next day. Several weeks later, on the day of John's discharge from the hospital, I told Susan to pick him up, saying I was preparing a celebration. In the meantime, Michael and I cooked a feast and welcomed them with a full table of dishes, along with a crucial setup: a container filled with a white powder resembling strong powder. As John and Susan entered the room, Michael guided them to the table.
Hey, I helped make this feast too. Eat a lot.
They soon started whispering to each other after sitting down.
Mom, isn't that?
Don't be ridiculous. It can't be here.
They looked pale, seeing the white powder on the table. Is the seasoning okay? I asked, but they kept their heads down, not touching the food. By the way, I heard sprinkling this on food makes you feel energized. I handed the white powder to Michael, saying, "Sprinkle this on for them."
Stop it. Don't put that unknown stuff in.
John, terrified, knocked the powder out of Michael's hand. "What's wrong? I just want you and Grandma to live a long life," I said with my brightest smile, as Susan also shouted, "Stop it." "Why? You wanted me to stay healthy too, right? That's why you put it on my cake, although you ended up eating it and got hospitalized." They looked horrified. I then presented them with some papers. I had our company's inspectors analyze this substance. Here are the results. It contains dangerous components that could be lethal in certain quantities. John's eyes darted around as he faced unexpected evidence.
I don't know anything about this.
But this is from what Susan had, right?
How dare you go through my things? And I only bought it because I was told it was a health supplement.
I confronted them with more evidence. Then what's this? 10 grams leads to the death, it says. This date is the day Bob was taken by ambulance, right? I placed a copy of John's planner on the table. After a moment of silence, John started to speak, defeated.
Dad was in the way. He didn't like how close Mom and I were, always meddling in everything we did.
Exactly. He was always getting between us and was so annoying. Couldn't stand him.
They probably resented Bob for worrying about his son's dependency on Susan and intervening. I was appalled by their selfish motives. Having succeeded once without getting caught, they now aim to send me to death too.
You're also an eyesore.
Right, you're in the way of me and my son.
That's no excuse to kill someone. What you did is a crime. I'm calling the police and submitting this evidence.
You think we'll let you do that?
Suddenly, John burned the documents with a lighter.
There's no evidence now. The police will just think it's a delusional story of a daughter-in-law's revenge.
As John smugly approached me, Michael coolly pointed out,
Dad, that's just a copy, and I've recorded our entire conversation on a voice recorder, which is more than enough evidence.
John turned pale and muttered, "No way," while Susan desperately said, "We were so close to getting rid of the nuisance."
Dad, I can't believe you'd attempt such a sloppy plan. No matter what you plan, it's bound to fail with me by Mom's side.
Michael said. He then laid out a meticulous plan, leaving them speechless. When I called the police, I advised Michael, "Your dad can never do as you plan since he has been a mama's boy who can't stand on his own. Don't be like me. Use your knowledge rightly."
Of course, Mom. Don't worry.
John and Susan, silent the whole time, finally spoke. "We don't need a husband father like him in our lives."
Don't say that. We're sorry. Please don't call the police.
Yes, we apologize.
But it was too late for their sudden apologies. Reflect on your actions in jail. Goodbye. As the police arrived and took them away, they were crying and screaming. The copy of the planner and the voice recording served as evidence, leading to their arrest. The shop where Susan bought the poison was also investigated, and the owner was also arrested. Following a divorce from John, I claimed $20,000 each from him and Susan as compensation, forcing them to sell their house to pay it, with nowhere to return after prison. I left the house where Michael and I had lived.
Mom, you fulfill all 4 elements of happiness. You're bound to be happy. I guarantee it.
Is that so? But I'm happy because you've helped me and set me free. Smiling together, we were determined to live our lives to the fullest.